After my husband was killed on the highway, I had $300, a 6-month belly, and nowhere to sleep. My in-laws gave me the only thing they had left, a box of handwritten recipes and their den. 7 years later, I sold the company I built from those recipes for $32 million. When my parents showed up to collect their share, I handed them the bill, and every single face at that table went completely white. My name is Reina, I'm 32 years old, and until the November night my husband Joel was killed by a drunk driver on I-65, I believed that family would always show up when it counted. I was 26 when we married. Joel taught 8th grade history at a public school in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He was not a wealthy man. He drove a 2011 Civic with a cracked dashboard and bought his dress shirts at Goodwill because he spent every spare dollar on classroom supplies for students whose families couldn't afford them. He was the kindest person I had ever known in my life, and my parents despised him for it. My parents built their life in the Brentwood corridors south of Nashville. My father made his money in commercial real estate development in the 90s, and had never once let anyone forget it. The neighborhood they lived in was the kind where the HOA had opinions about mailbox colors. My mother chaired 3 charity boards and had lunch at the club twice a week. They measured every person they met against net worth, zip code, and projected earning potential. Joel failed every metric they had. My sister Shelby had done everything right by their standards. She'd married Todd, a corporate insurance broker who wore a Rolex and talked about his golf handicap at dinner. They lived in a custom-built home in Franklin with heated bathroom floors and a wine cellar. My parents treated their house like a second home and treated Shelby like a proof of concept. Every Sunday dinner was a 3-hour tribute to how well she'd turned out. When Joel and I found out I was pregnant, we were scared and thrilled in equal parts. We'd just moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Smyrna. Joel was finishing his master's degree at night. I was doing bookkeeping part-time for a landscaping company. We didn't have much, but we had a plan. Then the call came on a Tuesday in November. A 19-year-old with 3 prior DUIs ran a red light at 60 miles an hour. Joel never had a chance. I was 6 months along. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, a funeral that cost $6,000 I didn't have, hospital bills from the 2 hours they'd worked on Joel before he was gone, and a grief so physical it felt like breathing through concrete. My savings were $4,000. The landlord needed first and last month's rent on a cheaper apartment. My maternity leave from the bookkeeping job was unpaid. I drove to Brentwood on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother opened the door wearing a cashmere robe and holding a coffee cup. I stood on her porch in a maternity coat that no longer buttoned over my stomach and asked if I could stay in the guest room until after the baby came. Just a few months, just to stabilize. My mother looked at my belly, then at my face, then she sighed the way someone sighs when a flight gets delayed. Reina, we talked about this when you chose Joel. Her voice was even, patient, the way you talk to someone who keeps making the same mistake. We told you the life you'd be signing up for. A teacher's salary doesn't carry a family through hardship. We're not a rescue service for decisions we warned you against. She adjusted her robe. Shelby and Todd are using the guest suite for a home gym renovation right now. There simply isn't space. My father walked through the foyer behind her, saw me at the door, and immediately held up one finger, the universal signal for not now, I'm on a call, and disappeared down the hallway. He did not come back to the door. My mother pressed a check for $300 into my hand. She said it was for the baby. Then she closed the door while I was still standing there. I sat in my car in their driveway for 10 minutes without starting the engine. Something went very cold and very quiet inside me in that moment, and that coldness did not fully leave for a long time. I drove 40 minutes north to the small house in Antioch where Joel's parents had lived for 30 years. My father-in-law Hank had spent his career doing HVAC installation and repair. My mother-in-law Loretta had been a lunch aide at an elementary school until her knees gave out. They had both been at Joel's funeral in the front row, shaking, trying to hold themselves together for my sake. They were still drowning in their own grief, but when I knocked on their door, Loretta took one look at me and pulled me inside without saying a single word. They didn't have a guest room. Hank built a wall partition in the den and converted it into a bedroom in 2 days. Working evenings after his shifts, he wouldn't hear any argument about it. My daughter was born in January. I named her Ren. Before I'd even been discharged from the hospital, Loretta appeared carrying a plastic bin. Inside were notebooks. Joel's grandmother's handwriting, spidery and faded, recording decades of Southern baking, biscuits, layer cakes, braided breads, cardamom rolls that people had apparently driven 20 miles to buy at a church sale in 1987. Joel always said you'd know what to do with these more than we would, Loretta told me. Her eyes were red from crying in the hallway before she came in. He talked about your baking all the time. He said you made his grandmother's cardamom bread better than she ever did. I looked at those notebooks for a long time. I need a commercial kitchen, I said. Hank knew a man from his HVAC days who owned a supper club that sat empty on weekday mornings. He called in a favor. I had access to a professional kitchen from 6 to 11 a.m. 3 days a week for $50 a session. I brought Ren in a bouncy seat and propped her near the door where I could see her while I worked. I started with the cardamom bread. I dropped off samples at 2 coffee shops in East Nashville. One called me back the next morning and ordered 8 loaves a week. I won't romanticize what came next, because there was nothing romantic about it. For 2 years I barely slept. Loretta watched Ren during every morning shift without ever asking to be compensated. Hank drove deliveries in his truck on his days off without once suggesting he should be paid back. I reinvested every dollar the business brought in. I took out a small business loan through the SBA after my 3rd rejection. I rented a real commercial space. I hired 1 employee, then 3, then 8. I applied to farmers markets across Middle Tennessee and drove our product out in a cooler in the back of Hank's truck until I could afford a van. I pitched independent grocery buyers in person, walking in with samples and a 1-page business plan I'd written on Loretta's kitchen table after Ren went to sleep. I named the company Hearthline Provisions. Within 4 years, our products were on shelves at 37 independent grocers across Tennessee and northern Georgia. By year 5, we were in 2 regional chains. By year 6, I had 43 full-time employees, a 2nd production facility in Chattanooga, and a line of shelf-stable products that had just launched in Whole Foods stores across the Southeast. My parents never visited. My mother sent a birthday card when Ren turned 2. My father did not acknowledge the business at all until a local business journal ran a profile on me, and then, only then, did he mention it to one of his golf partners as my daughter's little food project. The acquisition offer from Meridian Consumer Brands came through my attorney on a Thursday afternoon in April. Meridian was a national conglomerate that acquired regional food brands with devoted followings and scaled them across the country. Their acquisitions director had eaten our cardamom bread at a trade conference in Knoxville and tracked down our distributor the same afternoon. $32 million. The brand, the IP, the production infrastructure, and a 5-year consulting contract for me at a guaranteed salary. I sat in my attorney's office for a long time after she slid that term sheet across the table. I thought about the $300 check. I thought about Hank driving a refrigerated van in February at 5 in the morning so I could make a market delivery. I thought about Loretta reading bedtime stories to Ren in the den they'd partitioned for us. The thin wall between them and the sound of a baby they hadn't expected to be raising at their age. I need 2 weeks to review, I told my attorney, and I need total confidentiality, nothing public until closing. She agreed without question. The closing was set for a Saturday evening, 3 weeks out, a private dinner at a restaurant in the Gulch neighborhood of Nashville, where the Meridian team would fly in for the formal signing. I had not told a single person outside my legal team. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday, my mother, first call in 4 months. She didn't ask about Ren. She said we have a situation and started talking. Todd had made a series of catastrophic commercial real estate investments and was facing serious debt exposure. My parents had quietly co-signed 2 of his loans. They were in trouble, and my mother had read the business journal profile. She had done the math or attempted to. "You've built something impressive," she said, and I recognized the particular warmth in her voice. The warmth she only used when she needed something. "Your father was thinking that a family investment structure might make sense as you approach whatever's next. He has 30 years of experience managing capital events. He could protect you from the kinds of mistakes that take people down." I told her I'd think about it. Then I called my attorney and explained what I needed. 3 days later, my parents arrived in Antioch with Shelby and Todd. My mother stepped out of the Mercedes and looked at the house, which I'd renovated substantially over 3 years. New siding, wraparound porch, original hardwood refinished, and visibly recalibrated whatever poverty she'd expected to find. My father stepped out next, scanning the property with the automatic appraisal reflex of a man who'd been buying and selling buildings for 30 years. Shelby got out smoothing her blazer. Todd came last, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. My father sat at my kitchen table and talked about family trusts and capital allocation, and his decades of institutional experience. He had a folder of printed materials from his wealth management firm. He slid it toward me like a gift. "Whatever transaction you're approaching," he said, in the voice he used for closing deals, "you don't navigate that alone. The tax exposure on a liquidity event of this magnitude, you need someone with real experience at the table." "I have an attorney, a CPA, a financial advisor." "Amateur hour," he said pleasantly, like correcting me was a kindness. I told him I'd take it under advisement. That night, after they'd driven to the hotel my mother had insisted on booking, I went to my home office. I found a draft document in my filing cabinet, an early-stage operating agreement that had been replaced months before it was ever signed. It referenced in dense legal language a co-signatory provision for major asset transfers, a placeholder, completely superseded, no legal standing whatsoever. I left it sitting open on my desk. In the morning, I reviewed the footage from the office nanny cam I'd installed 2 years earlier, after a contractor went through my desk during a renovation. At 6:47 a.m., Todd appeared in the frame. He moved quietly with the specific carefulness of a man who knows he should not be there. He went through the filing cabinet, then the desk drawers. Then he found the open document on the desk. I watched him read it. I watched his shoulders drop with the physical relief of a drowning man grabbing something solid. He photographed every page and slipped out. By 8 o'clock, when I came downstairs, the voices in my kitchen were animated in a way they hadn't been the night before. My father had transformed overnight from mildly anxious to genuinely triumphant. He proposed a family managing partnership, with himself at the head, structured to protect Ren's long-term interests and incidentally address Todd's debt exposure. "When exactly were you thinking for all this?" I asked. "Before the end of the month," my mother said. "Whatever's happening soon, we want to be ready." "Interesting," I said. "I have something this Saturday evening that might be relevant, a small dinner downtown, business associates." I watched my father file that away like a card he planned to play later. That Saturday, the restaurant I'd reserved in the Gulch was a converted warehouse space. Exposed brick, high ceilings, long communal tables. I'd taken the private dining room for the Meridian team, my attorney, and my accountant. The main dining room I'd opened to my entire staff, all 43 employees and their families, for a company dinner I'd been planning for 3 months, timed deliberately. They knew something was happening, they didn't know what. I'd told them to dress up and bring whoever mattered most to them. Hank and Loretta arrived early. Loretta wore a navy dress I'd never seen before and small pearl earrings. Hank had gotten a haircut. They both had the look of people trying not to let hope run too far ahead of them. I walked them to the best table in the room, dead center, and pulled out Loretta's chair myself. "Reina," Loretta said quietly, taking in the room filling with my employees and their children, the white tablecloths, the flowers arranged at every place setting. "What is all this?" "Just dinner," I said, "stay close." My parents arrived 20 minutes later with Shelby and Todd. My father had worn a suit. My mother had dressed for an event. Shelby had put on jewelry. Todd was already sweating through his collar. They walked in expecting a modest gathering they could quietly take over. Instead, they found 43 employees and their families filling a room, and at the back, the private dining room marked with a Meridian Consumer Brands banner they did not recognize. My mother pulled me aside. "Who are all these people?" "My team," I said. My father drifted toward the private room with the momentum of a man who had long since decided he belonged anywhere he walked. A woman in a Meridian polo stepped into his path. "Sir, this room is for the private event." "I'm the family patriarch," my father said. He said it with complete confidence. "I'll need your name on the guest list," she said. His name was not on the list. He returned to the main room, found a chair near the edge of the space, and spent the next hour in a rigid, recalculating silence. At 8 o'clock, the Meridian Acquisitions Director stepped out of the private dining room into the main space. Her name was Mrs. Okafor. She had built her career acquiring regional brands and turning them into household names, and she moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who had signed a great many contracts and had no patience for theater. She crossed the room toward me. My father stood. He stepped into her path and extended his hand. Gene Whitfield, Reina's father. I've been advising on the structure of this transaction. I'd like to discuss the family trust provisions before the... Miss Okafor looked at his outstretched hand. I'm sorry, she said. What role do you hold in Hearthline provisions? My father straightened. I'm her father, the family. I'm going to need to ask you to take your seat. Not unkind, completely final. She looked past him. Reina? I had been standing 20 feet away. I walked across the room and shook Ms. Okafor's hand. Thank you for making the trip, I said. I think we're ready. My father stood in the middle of the room, still holding his own unshaken hand. The color had drained from his face so completely and so quickly that for a moment I thought he might actually need to sit down. We moved to a signing table my staff had set up at the front of the main dining room. I had wanted my employees to see it. I had wanted Hank and Loretta to see it. Ms. Okafor opened the portfolio. My attorney reviewed the final clause and nodded. I picked up the pen. I signed my name 4 times. Ms. Okafor pressed one finger to her earpiece, listened, gave me a single clean nod. Wire confirmed, she said. $32 million cleared into Hearthline Provisions LLC. Congratulations, Reina. Meridian is honored to carry this brand. The room came apart. 43 people who had worked brutal early mornings and market Saturdays in January, cold and delivery runs no one outside this room would ever know about, stood up and cheered with everything they had, because we had all been waiting a long time for something to be confirmed, and now it was. I looked over at Hank and Loretta. Hank had both hands pressed flat on the table. Loretta was crying in the way she always cried, silently, with her whole face, like she was trying not to take up too much space even with her grief. I picked up the microphone my team had set up near the signing table. 7 years ago, I said, I was 25 years old, 6 months pregnant, and I had nothing. The room went quiet like a held breath. I mean nothing. I went to my parents' house and asked if I could sleep in their guest room until my daughter was born. They said no. I didn't look at my mother when I said it. I didn't need to. The people who helped me were Joel's parents, Hank and Loretta. They gave up their den. They watched my daughter every morning while I baked in a borrowed kitchen at 6 a.m. They drove deliveries in a pickup truck in February without ever asking to be repaid. They never asked me for a single thing. My voice stayed steady. I had decided it would. Every product that Meridian just paid $32 million for grew from recipes in Joel's grandmother's notebooks. Notebooks that Loretta brought to me in the hospital the day my daughter was born. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice in the water glasses. Effect this morning, I continued. $15 million has been placed in an irrevocable trust in Hank and Loretta's names. That money is theirs unconditionally for the rest of their lives. Loretta made a sound I had never heard her make. Hank stood up and then sat back down, like his legs had voted on the matter without consulting him. My employees erupted. Someone at the back of the room was openly crying, several someones. When the room settled, I turned. My father was standing near the edge of the space with the expression of a man watching the ground shift beneath his feet. My mother had both hands pressed over her mouth. Shelby was gripping Todd's arm. The remaining proceeds, I said clearly, are in a sealed trust for my daughter Ren, accessible when she turns 30. There is no family partnership. There is no advisory role. There is no managing position. This money was earned by my employees, by Hank and Loretta, and by me. It will go to the people who earned it, every cent. I set the microphone down. My father crossed the room. He had his checkbook out. I saw it in his hand. And something in his face had shifted into a register I recognized from childhood, the one that meant he was about to make an offer he believed would fix everything. Whatever number makes this right, he said, his voice lower than usual. Name it. We made mistakes. I can see that now. But you're my daughter. He uncapped his pen. Tell me what it takes. I looked at him for a moment, at the checkbook, at the pen. The private dining room cost $4,000, I said. The reservation was booked on my company account without my authorization. I have an invoice. I'd like it settled tonight. He stared at me. He wrote the check. His hand was controlled. I'll give him that much even now. He tore it from the book and set it on the table between us. I picked it up, looked at it, folded it in half and slid it into my jacket pocket. Thank you, I said. My team will see you out. They left. My mother walked with her chin at the particular angle she used when she was most humiliated. My father did not look back. Shelby said nothing. Todd moved like a man who had stopped expecting anything good to happen for the foreseeable future. Hank and Loretta stayed until the restaurant closed. Hank ate 3 full plates of food and told my head baker twice that the cinnamon knots were the best thing he'd eaten in 30 years. Loretta held Ren in her lap for an hour and read her the kids' menu like it was a storybook, her voice going slow and warm the way it always did at bedtime, until my daughter fell asleep against her shoulder. I sat across from them at the end of the night, the room quieting down to the sound of chairs being stacked and music being turned off, and I didn't say very much. There wasn't much that needed saying. Joel would have been so proud of you, Loretta said eventually. I thought about him teaching 8th graders with his own money. I thought about the cracked dashboard of his Civic. I thought about the Tuesday night phone call and the 6 years that came after it. I know, I said. He'd have been embarrassed though. He hated when anyone made a fuss. Hank laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from him in a long time. It filled the room the way he always did, bigger than it had any right to be. I drove home that night with Ren asleep in her car seat, and the $4,000 check still folded in my pocket. When I got inside, I stood in the kitchen for a moment with all the lights off, just listening to the house. Then I put the check in an envelope for my accountant and went upstairs. I stood in the doorway of Ren's room and watched her breathe. The nightlight threw a soft circle on the ceiling. One of Loretta's quilts was pulled up to her chin. 6 months later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned without my asking that my parents had listed the Brentwood house. Todd and Shelby were in the middle of a divorce that had become public in the way these things do when the financial records start surfacing. My mother had quietly resigned from her charity boards. My father, I was told, was consulting for a property management company, not running deals, consulting, which in his world was its own kind of falling. I listened the way you listen to weather reports from a city you used to live in. It was information. It didn't belong to me anymore. What belonged to me was Saturday mornings, when Hank came over and showed Ren how to use tools in his workshop, and she handed him things with great seriousness, and called him Pop like she'd been doing it her whole life. What belonged to me was Loretta's garden, expanding into my backyard with my full encouragement, and the smell of something slow-cooked on her stove that meant she'd started before noon. What belonged to me was a daughter who would grow up knowing, in her bones, the difference between people who show up and people who don't. My mother once told me, standing on her porch in Brentwood, that I had made my choices and now I had to live with them. She was not entirely wrong. The choices I made had cost me everything at first. They'd taken years to rebuild. They'd asked things of me I hadn't known I had to give. But I hadn't built anything from her money or her approval or her guest room. I'd built it from $300 borrowed dollars and a box of handwritten recipes, and 2 people who never once turned me away at the door. That, I had learned, was the only foundation that ever actually held.